Stormer Show. Got my Badlands Chugs shirt on. We are ready with some more of a Russian author series, Locked and Loaded. For those of you that are looking forward to a fitness and health stream, I should have one tomorrow. I just don't feel like doing a routine today, to tell you the truth. So instead, what I think we'll have is our Russian author just chatting. Let's see, Phoenix Wright and Fallout 76 premiere today. And I might offer some quick Hearthstone gameplay too, prior to Fallout 76. Whew, I just feel tired. Like, I've been sleeping a lot. Like, I wake up at noon and then I take a nap until 3. Whew. But anyway, as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for following on Twitch and subscribing on YouTube. I still only have 2 subscribers on YouTube, so come on, guys and gals. Share the show. Tell all your friends and family, everyone you know. Take this stream and show to the stars. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the reading. As always, I will start with War and Peace, and then move right into Crime and Punishment. I think Crime and Punishment makes for better reading, and I have been struggling lately with this stinking just chatting on Twitch. For some reason, it hasn't been saving my VODs. I think the last version of this Russian author series, Crime and Punishment, also did not get saved. And I don't know why that is. Like, I'm pretty sure that's because of my internet. But whatever it may be, if you miss one or more of my shows, sorry about that. It's just my life situation. Donations can certainly help. Feel free to donate. I have a donation link below on Twitch. For all of you, my YouTube channel audience, I have a Venmo set up, Stormer Show, that you can also donate tips to. I don't actually have a Patreon currently set up. I may at some point in the future consider setting one up, particularly if and when the popularity of my show increases. It just doesn't really seem to make sense at this point when I'm really struggling to get my numbers up. But yes, Venmo is there, and so is the OBS donation interface, and you can donate whatever you want. I think you may have an option of submitting a message as well through the tip feature. To the best of my knowledge, at minimum, I should be notified if and when I do get a donation, so I will see it. Thus far, we have a single donator, denominator. He donated $5, and that was quite a while ago, so if you would like to donate, please do feel free. It does help the show. Keep buying lotto tickets too to try to turn my life around, but if you'd like to help me speed up that process, donating is always an option. Okay, without further ado, let's head into the book. Chapter 11. The next day, the Emperor stopped at Wischau, and Viller, his physician, was repeatedly summoned to see him. At headquarters and among troops, nearby the news spread that the Emperor was unwell. He ate nothing and had slept badly that night, those around him reported. The cause of this indisposition was the strong impression made on his sensitive mind by the sight of the killed and wounded. At daybreak on the 17th, a French officer who had come with a flag of truce, demanding an audience with the Russian Emperor, was brought into Wischau from our outposts. This officer was Savory. I hope I'm saying that right. Savary. The emperor had only just fallen asleep, and so Savory had to wait. At midday, he was admitted to the emperor, and an hour later he rode off with Prince Dolgorukov to the advanced post of the French army. Yeah, the whole Twitch not saving my VODs thing is extremely annoying. If I ever quit streaming altogether, it will probably be because of the technical problems with the platform. It's just so irritating. Like, I was trying to stream the lunar eclipse last night, or this morning rather, and I just could not get Twitch to save the stinking VOD for the life of me. So sorry about that, particularly if you were looking forward to seeing that. I tried, I really did. I tried it twice, too. I saw the first one didn't record, I tried it again, and yeah, no such luck. I think it might have something to do with the size of my audience. Like, if I had more people watching the show, maybe it wouldn't be so easy for my content to fall by the wayside, but yeah, it's gonna come down to shares, follows, and subscribes. Those are the big three of channel growth. Okay. It was rumored that Savory had been sent to propose to Alexander a meeting with Napoleon. To the joy and pride of the whole army, a personal interview was refused, and instead of the sovereign, Prince Dolgorukov, the visitor at Wischau, was sent with Savory to negotiate with Napoleon if, contrary to expectations, these negotiations were actuated by a real desire for peace. Toward evening, Dolgorukov came back, went straight to the Tsar, and remained alone with him for a long time. On the 18th and 19th of November, the army advanced 2 days' march, and the enemy's outposts, after a brief interchange of shots, retreated. In the highest army circles from midday on the 19th, a great, excitedly bustling activity began which lasted till the morning of the 20th, when the memorable Battle of Austerlitz was fought. Till midday on the 19th, the activity, the eager talk, running to and fro, and dispatching of adjutants, was confined to the emperor's headquarters. But on the afternoon of that day, this activity reached Kutuzov's headquarters and the staffs of the commanders of columns. By evening, the adjutants had spread it to all ends and parts of the army, and in the night from the 19th to the 20th, the whole 80,000 allied troops rose from their bivouacs to the hum of voices, and the army swayed and stared in one enormous mass 6 miles long. Started. The concentrated activity which had begun at the emperor's headquarters in the morning and had started the whole movement that followed was like the first movement of the main wheel of a large tower clock. One wheel slowly moved, another was set in motion, and a third wheel began to revolve faster and faster. Levers and cogwheels to work, chimes to play, figures to pop out, and hands to advance with regular motion as a result of all the activity. Man, I'm feeling tired. Just as in the mechanism of a clock, so in the mechanism of the military machine, an impulse once given leads to the final result. Just as indifferently quiescent till the moment when motion is transmitted to them are the parts of the mechanism which the impulse has not yet reached. Wheels creak on their axles as the cogs engage one another, and the revolving pulleys whir with the rapidity of their movement. But a neighboring wheel is as quiet and motionless as though it were prepared to remain so for hundreds of years. But the moment comes when the lever catches it, and obeying the impulse, that wheel begins to creak and joins in the common motion, the results and aim of which are beyond its ken. Just as in a clock, the result of the complicated motion of innumerable wheels and pulleys is merely a slow and regular movement of the hands which show the time. So the results of all the complicated human activities of 160,000 Russians and French, all their passions, desires, remorse, humiliation, sufferings, outbursts of pride, fear, and enthusiasm, was only the loss of the Battle of Austerlitz. I'm just tired. Hopefully that's not a mosquito. I hate those dang things. Yeah, hopefully not. I actually got lights in here to specifically prevent that. Slow movement of the hand on the dial of human history. Dial of 3 Emperors. Prince Andrew was on duty that day and in constant attendance on the commander-in-chief. At 6 in the evening, Kutuzov went to the Emperor's headquarters, and after staying but a short time with the Tsar, went to see the Grand Marshal of the court, Count Tolstoy. Bolkonsky took the opportunity to go in to get some details of the coming action from Dolgorukov. He felt that Kutuzov was upset and dissatisfied about something, and that at headquarters they were dissatisfied with him, and also that at the Emperor's headquarters everyone adopted toward him the tone of men who know something others do not know. He therefore wished to speak to Dolgorukov. "Well, how do you know, my dear fellow?" said Dolgorukov, who was sitting at tea with Bilibin. "The feat is for tomorrow." "How is your old fellow?" "Out of sorts." "I won't say he is out of sorts, but I fancy he would like to be heard. They heard him at the Council of War and will hear him when he talks sense. But to temporize and wait for something now when Bonaparte fears nothing so much as a general battle is impossible." "Yes, have you seen him?" said Prince Andrew. "Well, what is Bonaparte like? How did he impress you?" "Yes, I saw him, and am convinced that he fears nothing so much as a general engagement," repeated Dolgorukov, evidently prizing this general conclusion which he had arrived at from his interview with Napoleon. If he weren't afraid of a battle, why did he ask for that interview? Why negotiate, and above all, why retreat, when to retreat is so contrary to his method of conducting war? Believe me, he is afraid of a general battle. His hour has come, mark my words. Yeah, I think they're off. I think Napoleon was not afraid of battles. He was capable militaristically and could demonstrate that pretty well. "But tell me, what is he like, said Prince Andrew again. "He's a man in a grey overcoat, very anxious that I should call him your majesty, but who, to his chagrin, got no title from me." "That's the sort of man he is, and nothing more," replied Dolgorukov, looking round at Bilibin with a smile. "Despite my great respect for old Kutuzov," he continued, "we should be a nice set of fellows if we were to wait about and so give him a chance to escape or to trick us, now that we certainly have him in our hands. Now we mustn't forget Suvorov and his rule, not to put yourself in a position to be attacked, but yourself to attack. Believe me, in war the energy of young men often shows the way better than all the experience of old conctators." Let's see, do I have any meaning for that? No, I don't. Might be able to search the web. Someone who postpones work is a conctator. Out of laziness or habitual carelessness. Procrastinator is another way of saying it. Conctator. "But in what position are we going to attack him? I've been at the outpost today, and it's impossible to say where his chief forces are situated," said Prince Andrew. He wished to explain to Dolgorukov a plan of attack he had himself formed. "Oh, that is all the time," Dolgorukov said quickly, and getting up, he spread a map on the table. "All eventualities have been foreseen. If he is standing before Brunn..." Prince Andrew Dolgorukov rapidly but indistinctly explained Way Brother's plan of a flanking movement. Prince Andrew began to reply and to state his own plan, which might have been as good as Way Brother's, but for the disadvantage that Way Brother had already been approved. As soon as Prince Andrew began to demonstrate the defects of the latter and the merits of his own plan, Prince Dolgorukov ceased to listen to him and gazed absent-mindedly not at the map, but at Prince Andrew's face. Yeah, I might have to take another nap. I'm like drifting in and out of consciousness. "There will be a council of war at Kutuzov's tonight, though. You can say all this there," remarked Dolgorukov. "I will do so," said Prince Andrew, moving away from the map. Yeah, War and Peace is not helping at all. Like, there's never any action. For a book about war, there's like never any action. "Whatever are you bothering about, gentlemen?" said Bilibin, who till then had listened with an amused smile to their conversation and now was evidently ready with a joke. "Whether tomorrow brings victory or defeat, the glory of our Russian arms is secure. Except your Kutuzov, there is not a single Russian in command of a column. The commanders are Air General Wetfen, Le Comte de Langran, Le Prince de Liechtenstein, Le Prince de Hohenlohe, And finally, Prish Prish, and so on, like all those Polish names. Be quiet, backbiter, said Dolgorukov. This is not true. There are now 2 Russians, Miloradovich and Doktorov, and there would be a third, Count Arkhchiv, if his nerves were not too weak. However, I think General Kutuzov has come out, said Prince Andrew. I wish you good luck and success, gentlemen, he added, and went out after shaking hands with Dolgorukov and Bilbin. On the way home, Prince Andrew could not refrain from asking Kutuzov, who was sitting silently beside him, what he thought of tomorrow's battle. Kutuzov looked sternly at his adjutant, and after a pause replied, I think the battle will be lost, and so I told Count Tolstoy and asked him to tell the Emperor. What do you think he replied? But my dear general, I'm engaged with rice and cutlets. Look after the military matters yourself. Yes, that was the answer I got. Alright, next time, chapter 12. Hopefully they are not standing around shooting the breeze. Hopefully we see some action. Because I don't think anything seems quite as tedious as War and Peace. Them, like, talking about what a Napoleon seemed like. You will see him on the battlefield, and that will tell you everything that you need to know about who Napoleonism was. Anyway, let's move on to Crime and Punishment. Chapter 1, Part 5 now. Okay, I'm in my favorite recliner, so I'm dozing off. The morning that followed the fateful interview with Dunya and her mother brought sobering influences to bear on Peter Petrovich. Like, it already makes for better reading. It gets right to it. Like, we're focused on one of the major characters, Peter Petrovich. He's not just, like, rambling on and on about, like, who knows. And, yeah, which is why I think I just personally prefer Crime and Punishment. Intensely unpleasant as it was, he was forced little by little to accept as a fact beyond recall what had seemed to him only the day before fantastic and incredible. The black snake of wounded vanity had been gnawing at his heart all night. When he got out of bed, Peter Petrovich immediately looked in the looking glass. He was afraid that he had jaundice. Let's see, jaundice is a medical condition with yellowing of the skin or whites of the eyes, rising from excess of the pigment bilirubin and typically caused by obstruction of the bile duct, by liver disease, or by excessive breakdown of red blood cells. It could also mean bitterness, resentment, or envy, which I believe is the case here. Peter Petrovich has just lost Dunya, aka Avdotya Romanovna. So he's probably bitter about the loss. However, his health seemed unimpaired so far, and looking at his noble, clear-skinned countenance, which had grown fattish of late, Peter Petrovich for an instant was positively comforted in the conviction that he would find another bride, and perhaps even a better one. But coming back to the sense of his present position, he turned aside and spat vigorously, which excited a sarcastic smile in Andrei Simianovich Lebezhnikov, the young friend with whom he was staying. That smile Peter Petrovich noticed, and at once set it down against his young friend's account. He had set down a good many points against him of late. His anger was redoubled when he reflected that he ought not to have told Andrei Semyonovich about the results of yesterday's interview. That was the second mistake he had made in temper, through impulsiveness and irritability. Moreover, all that morning one unpleasantness followed another. He even found a hitch awaiting him in his legal case in the Senate. He was particularly irritated by the owner of the flat, which had been taken in view of his approaching marriage, and was being redecorated at his own expense. The owner, a rich German tradesman, would not entertain the idea of breaking a contract, which had just been signed, and insisted on the full forfeit money. Though Peter Petrovich will be giving him back the flat practically redecorated. In the same way, the upholsterers refused to return a single ruble of the installment paid for the furniture purchased, but not yet removed to the flat. Am I to get married simply for the sake of the furniture? Peter Petrovich ground his teeth, and at the same time, once more, he had a gleam of desperate hope. Can all that be really so irrevocably over? Is it no use to make another effort? The thought of Dunya sent a voluptuous pang through his heart. He endured anguish at that moment, and if it had been possible to slay Raskolnikov instantly by wishing it, Peter Petrovich would promptly have uttered the wish. It was my mistake, too, not to have given them money, he thought. As he returned dejectedly to Levishnikov's room, why on earth was I such a Jew? It was false economy. I meant to keep them without a penny so that they should turn to me as their providence, and look at them. Foo! If I'd spent some 1,500 rubles on them for the trousseau and presents, on knickknacks, dressing cases, jewelry, materials, and all that sort of trash from Knopf's and the English shop, my position would have been better and stronger. They could not have refused me so easily. They are the sort of people that would feel bound to return money and presents if they broke it off, and they would find it hard to do it. I think it has more to do with your inability to get along with Raskolnikov, Peter Petrovich, but that could have more to do with Raskolnikov than Peter Petrovich, actually. And their conscience would prick them. How can we dismiss a man who has hitherto been so generous and delicate? I made a blunder. And money can't solve all your problems. Excuse me, it can't buy everything and it can't solve all your problems. It can help, though. There's one thing I've learned in my life, it's that it can help solve problems. And grinding his teeth again, Peter Petrovich called himself a fool, but not aloud, of course. He returned home twice as irritated and angry as before. The preparations for the funeral dinner at Katerina Ivanovna's excited his curiosity as he passed. He had heard about it the day before. He fancied, indeed, that he had been invited, but absorbed in his own cares, he had paid no attention. Inquiring of Madame Lipovichel, who was busy laying the table while Katerina Ivanovna was away at the cemetery, he heard that the entertainment was to be a great affair, that all the lodgers had been invited, among them some who had not known the dead man, that even Andrei Semyonovich Lebezhnikov was invited in spite of his previous quarrel with Katerina Ivanovna, that he, Peter Petrovich, was not only invited, but was eagerly expected, as he was the most important of the lodgers. Amelia Ivanovna herself had been invited with great ceremony in spite of the recent unpleasantness, so she was very busy with preparations and was taking a positive pleasure in them. She was moreover dressed up to the nines, all in new black silk, and she was proud of it. All this suggested an idea to Peter Petrovich, and he went into his room, or rather Lebezhnikov's, somewhat thoughtful. He had learnt that Raskolnikov was to be one of the guests. Andrei Simianovich had been at home all the morning. The attitude of Peter Petrovich to this gentleman was strange, though perhaps natural. Peter Petrovich had despised and hated him from the day he came to stay with him, and at the same time he seemed somewhat afraid of him. Simianovich, I believe, is the one that's trying to court Dotya. So they were natural competitors, those two. Peter Petrovich had despised and hated him from the day he came to stay with him. At the same time, he seemed somewhat afraid of him. He had not come to stay with him on his arrival in Petersburg simply from parsimony, though that had perhaps been his chief object. Parsimony is unwillingness to spend money or use resources to save. He had heard of Andrei Semyonovich, who had once been his ward, as a leading young progressive who was taking an important part in certain interesting circles, the doings of which were a legend in the provinces. It had impressed Peter Petrovich. These powerful, omniscient circles who despised everyone and showed everyone up had long inspired in him a peculiar but quite vague alarm. He had not, of course, been able to form even an approximate notion of what they meant. He, like everyone, had heard that there were, especially in Petersburg, progressives of some sort, nihilists and so on, and like many people, he exaggerated and distorted the significance of those words to an absurd degree. What for many years past he had feared more than anything was being shown up, and this was the chief ground for his continual uneasiness at the thought of transferring his business to Petersburg. He was afraid of this, as little children are sometimes panic-stricken. Some years before, when he was just entering his own career, he had come upon two cases in which rather important personages in the province, patrons of his, had been cruelly shown up. One instance had ended in a great scandal for the person attacked, and the other had very nearly ended in serious trouble. For this reason, Peter Petrovich intended to go into the subject as soon as he reached Petersburg, and, if necessary, to anticipate contingencies by seeking the favor of our younger generation. He relied on Andrei Simianovich for this, and before his visit to Raskolnikov, he had succeeded in picking up some current phrases. He soon discovered that Andrei Simianovich was a commonplace simpleton, but that by no means reassured Peter Petrovich. Even if he had been certain that all the progressives were fools like him, it would not have allayed his uneasiness. All the doctrines, the ideas, the systems with which Andrei Simianovich pestered him had no interest for him. He had his own object. He simply wanted to find out at once what was happening here. Had these people any power or not? Had he anything to fear from them? Would they expose any enterprise of his? And what precisely was now the object of their attacks? Could he somehow make up to them and get around them if they were really powerful? Was this the thing to do or not? Couldn't he gain something through them? In fact, hundreds of questions presented themselves. Andrei Simianovich was an anemic, scrofulous little man, with strangely flaxen mutton-chop whiskers of which he was very proud. Let's see, scrofulous. Tuberculosis again. He was a clerk and had almost always something wrong with his eyes. He was rather soft-hearted but self-confident, sometimes extremely conceited in speech, which had an absurd effect, incongruous with his little figure. He was one of the lodgers most respected by Amelia Ivanovna, for he did not get drunk and paid regularly for his lodgings. Andrei Simianovich really was rather stupid. He attached himself to the cause of progress in our younger generation from enthusiasm. He was one of the numerous and varied legion of dullards, of half-animate abortions, conceited, half-educated coxcombs, who attached themselves to the idea most in fashion, only to vulgarize it, and who caricature every cause they serve, however sincerely. Though Lubechnikov was so good-natured, he too was beginning to dislike Peter Petrovich. This happened on both sides unconsciously. However simple Andrei Simianovich might be, he began to see Peter Petrovich was duping him and secretly despising him. He was not the right sort of man. He had tried expounding to him the system of Fourier and the Darwinian theory, but of late Peter Petrovich began to listen too sarcastically and even to be rude. The fact was he had begun instinctively to guess that Lubechnikov was not merely a commonplace simpleton, but perhaps a liar too, and that he had no connections of any consequence even in his own circle, but had simply picked things up third hand, and that very likely he did not even know much about his own work of propaganda, for he was too great a muddle. Fine person he would be to show anyone up. It must be noted, by the way, that Peter Petrovich had during those 10 days earlier eagerly accepted the strangest praise from Andrei Simianovich. He had not protested, for instance, when Andrei Simianovich belauded him for being ready to contribute to the establishment of the new commune, or to abstain from christening his future children, or to acquiesce if Dunya were to take a lover a month after marriage, and so on. Peter Petrovich so enjoyed hearing his own praises that he did not disdain even such virtues when they were attributed to him. Peter Petrovich has had on occasion that morning to realize some 5% bonds. Now he sat down to the table and counted over bundles of notes. Andrei Simianovich, who hardly ever had money, walked about the room pretending to himself to look at those banknotes with indifference, even contempt. Nothing would have convinced Peter Petrovich that Andrei Simianovich could really look on the money unmoved. The latter, on his side, kept thinking bitterly that Peter Petrovich was capable of entertaining such an idea about him, was perhaps glad of the opportunity of teasing his young friend by reminding him of his inferiority and the great difference between them. Found him incredibly inattentive and irritable, though he, Andrei Simianovich, began enlarging on his favorite subject, the foundation of a new special commune. The brief remarks that dropped from Peter Petrovich between the clicking of the beads on the reckoning frame betrayed unmistakable and discourteous irony. But the humane Andrei Simianovich ascribed Peter Petrovich's ill humor to his recent breach with Dunya, and he was burning with impatience to discourse on that theme. He had something progressive to say on the subject, which might console his worthy friend and could not fail to promote his development. There's some sort of festivity being prepared at the widow's, isn't there? Peter Petrovitch asked suddenly, interrupting Andrei Simianovich at the most interesting passage. Why, don't you know? Why, I was telling you last night what I think about all such ceremonies. She invited you too, I heard. You were talking to her yesterday. I should never have expected that beggarly fool would have spent on this feast all the money she got from that other fool Raskolnikov. I was surprised just now as I came through at the preparations there, the wines. Several people are invited. It's beyond everything, continued Peter Petrovitch, who seemed to have some object in pursuing the conversation. What, you say I'm asked too? When was that? I don't remember, but I shan't go. Why should I? I only said a word to her in passing yesterday of the possibility of her obtaining a year's salary as a destitute widow of a government clerk. I suppose she has invited me on that account, hasn't she? I don't intend to go either, said Lebezhnikov. I should think not, after giving her a thrashing. You might well hesitate. Who thrashed? Whom? Cried Lebezhnikov, flustered and blushing. Why, you thrashed Katerina Ivanovna a month ago. I heard so yesterday. So that's what your convictions amount to. And the woman question, too, wasn't quite sound. And Peter Petrovitch, as though comforted, went back to clicking his beads. It's all slander and nonsense, cried Lebezhnikov, who was always afraid of allusions to the subject. It was not like that at all. It was quite different. You've heard it wrong. It's a libel. I was simply defending myself. She rushed at me first with her nails. She pulled out all my whiskers. It's permissible for anyone, I should hope, to defend himself, and I never allow anyone to use violence to me on principle. For it's a fact, it's an act of despotism. What was I to do? I simply pushed her back. Luzhin went on laughing maliciously. You keep on like that because you're out of humor yourself, but that's nonsense and has nothing whatever to do with the woman in question. You don't understand. I used to think, indeed, that if women are equal to men in all respects, even in strength, as is maintained now, there ought to be an equality in that too. Of course, I reflected afterwards that such a question ought not really to arise, for there ought not to be fighting, and in the future society fighting is unthinkable. That it would be a queer thing to seek for equality in fighting. I'm not so stupid, though. Of course there is fighting. There won't be later, but at present there is. Confound it. How muddled one gets with you. It's not on that account that I'm not going. I'm not going on principle, not to take part in a revolting convention on memorial dinners, that's why. Though of course one might go to laugh at it. I'm sorry there won't be any priests at it. I should certainly go if there were. Then you would sit down at another man's table and insult it and those who invited you, huh? Certainly not insult, but protest. I should do it with good object. I might indirectly assist the cause of enlightenment and propaganda. It's the duty of every man to work for enlightenment and propaganda, and the more harshly, perhaps the better. I might drop a seed, an idea. Something might grow up from that seed. How should I be insulting them? They might be offended at first, but afterwards they'd see I'd done them a service. You know Terabieva, who's in the community now, was blamed because when she left her family and devoted, she wrote to her father and mother that she wouldn't go on living conventionally and was entering on free marriage, and it was said that she was too harsh, that she might have spared them and have written more kindly. I think that's all nonsense, and there's no need of softness. On the contrary, what's wanted is protest. Varents had been married 7 years. She abandoned her 2 children. She told her husband straight out in a letter. I realize that I cannot be happy with you. I can never forgive you that you've deceived me by concealing from me that there is another organization of society, by means of the communities. I've only lately learned it from a good-hearted man to whom I've given myself and with whom I am establishing a community. I speak plainly because I consider it dishonest to deceive you. Do as you think best. Do not hope to get me back. You're too late. I hope you will be happy. That's how letters like that ought to be written. Is that Terabieva the one you said had made a 3rd free marriage? No, it's only the 2nd, really. But what if it were the 4th? What if it were the 15th? That's all nonsense. If I ever regretted the death of my father or mother, it is now. I sometimes think, if my parents were living, what a protest I would have aimed at them. I would have done something on purpose. I would have shown them. I would have astonished them. I'm really sorry there is no one. To surprise. Well, be that as you will, Peter Petrovitch interrupted, but tell me this. Do you know the dead man's daughter, the delicate-looking little thing? It's true what they say about her, isn't it? What of it? I think it is my own personal conviction that this is the normal condition of women. Why not? I mean, distinguence. Yeah, I don't know, distinguence. To become aware of, or to notice. Yeah, I think that's what it means very loosely. It's like to notice. In our present society, it's not altogether normal because it is compulsory, but in the future society it will be perfectly normal because it will be voluntary. Even as it is, she was quite right. She was suffering, and that was her asset, so to speak, her capital which she had a perfect right to dispose of. Of course, in the future society, there will be no need of assets, but her part will have another significance, rational and in harmony with her environment. As to Sophia Semyonovna personally, I regard her action as a vigorous protest against the organization of society, and I respect her deeply for it. I rejoice indeed when I look at her. I was told that you got her turned out of these lodgings. Lebezhnikov was enraged. That's another slander, he yelled. It was not so at all. That was all Katerina Ivanovna's invention, for she did not understand. I never made love to Sophia Semyonovna. I was simply developing her, entirely disinterestedly, trying to rouse her to protest. All I wanted was her protest, and Sophia Semyonovna could not have remained here anyway. Sophia Semyonovna I guess that's the daughter. Have you asked her to join your community? You keep on laughing and very inappropriately. Allow me to tell you. You don't understand. There is no such role in a community. The community is established that there should be no such roles. In a community, such a role is essentially transformed. And what is stupid here is sensible there. What under present conditions is unnatural becomes perfectly natural in the community. It all depends on the environment. It's all the environment, and man himself is nothing. And I'm on good terms with Sophia Semyonovna to this day, which is a proof that she never regarded me as having wronged her. I am trying now to attract her to the community, but on quite a different footing. He makes it sound like that cop in Big Lebowski. He's like, we're trying to keep our beach community very nice, Lebowski. We don't want any deadbeats in our community, Lebowski. But I believe he's talking about prostitutes in the community. This guy, Lebezhnikov. What are you laughing at? We're trying to establish a community of our own, a special one on a broader basis. We've gone further in our convictions. We reject more. And meanwhile, I'm still developing Sophia Semyonovna. She has a beautiful, beautiful character. And you take advantage of her fine character, eh? No, on the contrary. On the contrary, queer thing to say. Believe me, why should I disguise it? In fact, I feel it strange myself how timid, chaste, and modern she is with me. And of course, are developing her, trying to prove to her that all that is modesty is nonsense. Not at all. How coarsely, how stupidly, excuse me saying so, you misunderstand the word development. Good heavens, how crude you still are. We're striving for the freedom of women, and you've only one idea in your head. Setting aside the general question of chastity and feminine modesty as useless in themselves and indeed prejudices. I fully accept her chastity with me because that's for her to decide. Of course, if she were to tell me herself that she wanted me, I should think myself very lucky because I like the girl very much. But as it is, no one has ever treated her more courteously than I. with more respect for her and for her dignity. I wait in hopes, that's all. You'd much better make her a present of something. I bet you never thought of that. You don't understand, as I've told you already. Of course, she is in such a position, but it's another question, quite another question. You simply despise her. Seeing a fact which you mistakenly consider deserving of contempt, you refuse to take a humane view of a fellow creature. You don't know what a character she is. I'm only sorry that of late she has quite given up reading and borrowing books. I used to lend them to her. I'm sorry, too, that with all the energy and resolution in protesting, which she has already shown once, she has little self-reliance, little, so to say, independence, so as to break free from certain prejudices and certain foolish ideas. Yet she thoroughly understands some questions, for instance, about kissing of hands, that it's an insult to a woman for a man to kiss her hand because it's a sign of inequality. We had a debate about it, and I described it to her. She listened attentively to an account of the workmen's associations in France, too. Now I'm explaining the question of coming into the room and the future society. What's that, pray? We had a debate lately on the question. Has a member of the community the right to enter another member's room, whether man or woman, at any time? And we decided that he has. It might be at an inconvenient moment. Like after one just got out of the shower. It doesn't actually say that, I just added that. Leveshnikov was really angry. Unpleasant. You're always thinking of something unpleasant, he cried with aversion. Get your head out of the gutter. Phew. How vexed I am that when I was expounding our system, I referred prematurely to the question of personal privacy. It's always a stumbling block to people like you. They turn it into ridicule before they understand it. And how proud they are of it, too. Phew. I've often maintained that the question should not be approached by a novice till he has a firm faith in the system. And tell me, please, what do you find so shameful, even in cesspools? I should be the first to be ready to clean out any cesspool you like. And it's not a question of self-sacrifice. It's simply work, honorable, useful work, which is as good as any other and much better than the work of Raphael and a Pushkin, because it's more useful. We take dumps and trash heaps and we turn it into the shining community center of tomorrow in our perfect utopian worlds. I don't know, I really like Leveshnikov for some reason. He's a very idealistic character. He's like, you know what? In our future, there's not going to be any rich. There's not going to be any poor. There's not going to be any women parading around the streets selling their bodies for cash. There's going to be total equality. We're going to break down every barriers. There's not even going to be arguments about whether or not we're going to get the vaccine because there's not even going to be sickness in the future. It's going to be freaking awesome. And we can be there today with a little proactivity and positive thinking and strong leaders. What do you mean by more honorable? I don't understand such expressions to describe human activity. More honorable, nobler, all those are old-fashioned prejudices which I reject. Everything which is of use to mankind is honorable. I only understand one word, useful. You can snigger as much as you like, but that's so. Peter Petrovich laughed heartily. He had finished counting the money and was putting it away. But some of the notes he left on the table. The cesspool question had already been a subject of dispute between them. What was absurd was that it made Leveshnikov really angry, while it amused Luzhin, and at that moment he particularly wanted to anger his young friend. It's your ill luck yesterday that makes you so ill-humored and annoying, blurted out Leveshnikov, who in spite of his independence and his protests, did not venture to oppose Peter Petrovich and still behaved to him with some of the respect habitual in earlier years. You'd better tell me this, Peter Petrovich interrupted with haughty displeasure. Can you, or rather are you, really friendly enough with that young person to ask her to step in here for a minute? I think they've all come back from the cemetery. I heard the sound of steps. I want to see her, that young person. What for? Leveshnikov asked with surprise. Oh, I want to. I'm leaving here today or tomorrow, and therefore I wanted to speak to her about... However, you may be present during the interview. It's better you should, indeed, for there's no knowing what you might imagine. I shan't imagine anything. I only asked, and if you've anything to say to her, nothing is easier than to call her in. I'll go directly, and you may be sure I won't be in your way. 5 minutes later, Lebeshnikov came in with Sonia. Yeah, okay, Sonia. Sonia's the daughter of Marmeladov. Is Sonia and Sofia Semyonovna the same person? That's what I'm kind of confused about. Because sometimes Fyodor does this where he, like, uses a single name for a character and it's, like, interchangeable. Like, Raskolnikov is Rodya Romanovich. His sister Avdotya Romanovna is Dunya. And then Peter Petrovich is also known as Luzhin in this. So sometimes it's a little bit confusing. It's like, okay, so is Sonia Sofia Semyonovna, or are those actually two different people? I don't know. But yeah, 5 minutes later, Lebeshnikov came in with Sonia. So he's using one name again for this character. She came in very much surprised and overcome with shyness as usual. She was always shy in such circumstances and was always afraid of new people. She had been as a child and was even more so now. Peter Petrovich met her politely and affably, but with a certain shade of bantering familiarity, which in his opinion was suitable for a man of his respectability and weight in dealing with a creature so young and so interesting as she. He hastened to reassure her and made her sit down facing him at the table. I think these characters are like pretty sharp contrasts. Like Peter Petrovich is a wealthy government employee, and she is someone who's had to scrape through life a lot. Sonia sat down, looked about her at Lebeshnikov, at the notes lying on the table, and then again at Peter Petrovich, and her eyes remained riveted on him. Lebeshnikov was moving to the door. Peter Petrovich signed to Sonia to remain seated and stopped Lebeshnikov. Is Raskolnikov in there? Has he come? He asked him in a whisper. Oh, sorry, is Raskolnikov in there? Has he come? Raskolnikov, yes. Why? Yes, he's here. I saw him just come in. Why? Well, I particularly beg you to remain here with us and not to leave me alone with this young woman. I only want a few words with her, but God knows what they make of it. I shouldn't like Raskolnikov to repeat anything. Do you understand what I mean? I understand. Lebeshnikov saw the point. Yes, you're right, of course. I'm convinced personally that you have no reason to be uneasy, but still you're right. Certainly I'll stay. I'll stand here at the window and not be in your way. I think you're right. Peter Petrovich returned to the sofa, sat down opposite Sonia, looked attentively at her, and assumed an extremely dignified, even severe expression. As much as to say, don't you make any mistake, madam. Sonia was overwhelmed with embarrassment. In the first place, Sofia Semyonovna. Yep. So Sonia and Sofia Semyonovna are the same person. Fyodor has done what he has done already, which is use one name, two different names for one person, which is a little bit confusing. I don't know why he does that. Like, just stick with one, please. Like, if it's Peter Petrovich, just call him Peter. If it's Sophia, just... It's like that movie Vanilla Sky. Like, is it Sophia or is it Sonia? Like who is this? Like, you're saying Sophia, but it looks like the other girl. Who is this? Okay, anyway. In the first place, Sofia Semyonovna, will you make any of my excuses to your respected mama? That's right, isn't it? Katerina Ivanovna stands in the place of a mother to you. And then Katerina Ivanovna is the one that's dying of tuberculosis. Peter Petrovich began with great dignity, though affably. It was evident that his intentions were friendly. Quite so, yes, the place of a mother, Sonia answered timidly and hurriedly. Then will you make my apologies to her? Through inevitable circumstances, I am forced to be absent and shall not be at the dinner in spite of your mamma's kind invitation. Yes, I'll tell her at once. Sonia hastily jumped up from her seat. Wait, that's not all. Peter Petrovich detained her, smiling at her simplicity and ignorance of good manners. And you know me, little, my dear Sophia Semyonovna. If you suppose I would have ventured to trouble a person like you for a matter of so little consequence affecting myself only, I have another object. Sonia sat down hurriedly. Her eyes rested again for an instant on the gray and rainbow-colored notes that remained on the table, but she quickly looked away and fixed her eyes on Peter Petrovich. She felt it horribly indecorous, especially for her, to look at another person's money. She stared at the gold eyeglass which Peter Petrovich held in his left hand, and at the massive and extremely handsome ring with the yellow stone on his middle finger. Again, extremely sharp contrast. Like, Peter Petrovich shows off his wealth, and Sonia cannot do that. She is pretty much the opposite. But suddenly she looked away, and not knowing where to turn, ended by staring Peter Petrovich again straight in the face. After a pause of still greater dignity, he continued. I chanced yesterday in passing to exchange a couple of words with Katerina Ivanovna, poor woman. That was sufficient to enable me to ascertain that she's in a position, preternatural, if one may so express it. Yes, preternatural. Beyond what is natural. Abnormal, I'd say, is how we would say it. Sonia hurriedly assented. Or it would be simpler and more comprehensible to say ill. Yes, simpler and more Yes, ill. Quite so. So then, from a feeling of humanity and, so to speak, compassion, I should be glad of service to her in any way, for seeing her unfortunate position. I believe the whole of this poverty-stricken family depends now entirely on you. Allow me to ask, Sonia rose to her feet, did you say something to her yesterday of the possibility of a pension? Because she told me you had undertaken to get her one. Was that true? Not in the slightest, and indeed it's an absurdity. I merely hinted at her obtaining temporary assistance as the widow of an official who had died in the service. If only she has patronage. But apparently your late parent had not served his full term, and had not indeed been in the service at all of late. In fact, if there could be any hope, it would be very ephemeral, because there would be no claim for assistance in that case. Far from it. And she is dreaming of a pension already. Go ahead, lady. Yes, she is, for she is credulous and good-hearted, and she believes everything from the goodness of her heart, and she is like that, yes. You must excuse her, said Sonia, and again she got to go. But you haven't heard what I have to say. No, I haven't heard, muttered Sonia. Then sit down. She was terribly confused. She sat down again a third time. Seeing her position with her unfortunate little ones, I should be glad, as I've said before, so far as lies in my power, to be of service. That is, so far as in my power, not more. One might, for instance, get up a subscription for her, or a lottery, something of the sort, such as is always arranged in such cases by friends or even outsiders desirous of assisting people. It was of that I intended to speak to you. It might be done. Yes, God will repay you for it, faltered Sonia, gazing intently at Peter Petrovich. It might be, but we will talk of it later. We might begin it today, but we will talk it over this evening and lay the foundation, so to speak. Come to me at 7 o'clock. Mr. Lebezhnikov, I hope, will assist us. But there is one circumstance of which I ought to warn you beforehand, and for which I venture to trouble you, Sophia Semyonovna, to come here. In my opinion, money cannot be. Indeed, it's unsafe to put it into Katerina Ivanovna's own hands. The dinner today is proof of that. Though she has not, so to speak, a crust of bread for tomorrow, and, well, boots or shoes or anything. She has bought today Jamaica rum, and even, I believe, Madeira and coffee. I saw it as I passed through. Tomorrow it will all fall upon you again. They won't have a crust of bread. It's absurd, really. And so, to my thinking, a subscription ought to be raised so that the unhappy widow should not know of the money. but only you for assistance. Am I right? I don't know. This is only today. Once in her life. She was so anxious to do honor, to celebrate the memory, and she is very sensible. But just as you think, and I shall be they will all be, and God will reward, and the orphans. Sonia burst into tears. Very well then, keep it in mind. And now will you accept for the benefit of your relation the small sum that I'm able to spare, for me personally? I'm very anxious that my name should not be mentioned in connection with it, here. Having, so to speak, anxieties of my own, I cannot do more. Peter Petrovich held out to Sonia a 10-ruble note carefully unfolded. Sonia took it, flushed crimson, jumped up, muttered something, and began taking leave. Peter Petrovich accompanied her ceremoniously to the door. She got out of the room at last, agitated and distressed, and returned to Katerina Ivanovna, overwhelmed with confusion. Should never take money from bad men. That's words to the wise. But she may not have, the luxury of declining. It is $10, which in those days was a lot of money. All this time, Lubezhnikov had stood at the window or walked about the room, anxious not to interrupt the conversation. When Sonia had gone, he walked up to Peter Petrovich and solemnly held out his hand. I heard and saw everything, he said, laying stress on the last verb. That is honorable. I mean to say it's humane. You wanted to avoid gratitude, I saw. Although I cannot, I confess, in principle, sympathize with private charity, for it not only fails to eradicate the evil, but even promotes it. Yet I must admit that I saw your action with pleasure. Yes, I like it. This is one of those, you should never give it to poor people because you're just going to waste it kind of things. It's completely foolish thing to say, in my opinion. If you give them money, they're going to do what any sensible person is going to do, which is use it to improve their lives. Don't use a poor person's situation to justify the greed of rich people. That doesn't make sense. That's all nonsense, muttered Peter Petrovich, somewhat disconcerted, looking carefully at Lubezhnikov. It's not nonsense. A man who has suffered distress and annoyance as you did yesterday, and who yet can sympathize with the misery of others. Such a man, even though he is making a social mistake, is still deserving of respect. I did not expect it indeed of you, Peter Petrovich, especially as according to your ideas. What a drawback your ideas are to you. How distressed you are, for instance, by your ill luck yesterday, cried the simple-hearted Lubezhnikov, who felt a return of affection for Peter Petrovich. What do you want with marriage, with legal marriage, my dear noble Peter Petrovich? Why do you cling to this legality of marriage? You may beat me if you like, but I'm glad, positively glad it hasn't come off, that you are free, that you are not quite lost for humanity. You see, I've spoken my mind. Because I don't want in your free marriage to be made a fool of, and to bring up another man's children. That's why I want a legal marriage, Luzhin replied in order to make some answer. Not entirely sure what the difference is. Yeah, I guess he doesn't want to play nanny or be a stepdad or something like that. Sounds like. He seemed preoccupied by something. Children. You referred to children. Lubezhnikov started off like a war horse at the trumpet call. Children are a social question, and a question of first importance. I agree. But the question of children has another solution. Some refuse to have children altogether because they suggest the institution of the family. We will speak of children later, but now as to the question of honor, I confess that's my weak point. That horrid military Pushkin expression is unthinkable in the dictionary of the future. What does it mean indeed? It's nonsense. There will be no deception in a free marriage. That is only the natural consequence of a legal marriage, so to say. It's corrective, a protest. So that indeed it's not humiliating. If I ever, to suppose an absurdity, were to be legally married, I should be positively glad of it. I should say to my wife, my dear, hitherto I have loved you. Now I respect you, for you've shown you can protest. You laugh. That's because you're incapable of getting away from prejudices. Confound it all. I understand now where the unpleasantness is of being deceived in a legal marriage, but it's simply a despicable consequence of a despicable position in which both are humiliated. When the deception is open, as in a free marriage, then it does not exist. It is unthinkable. Your wife will only prove how she respects you by considering you incapable of opposing her happiness and avenging yourself on her for her new husband. Damn it all. I sometimes dream if I were to be married. If I were to marry legally or not, it's just the same. I should present my wife with a lover if she had not found one for herself. My dear, I should say, I love you. But even more than that, I desire you to respect me. See, am I not right? Peter Petrovich sniggered as he listened, but without much merriment. He hardly heard it indeed. He was preoccupied with something else, and even Lubezhnikov at last noticed it. Peter Petrovich seemed excited and rubbed his hands. Lubezhnikov remembered all this and reflected upon it afterwards. Peter Petrovich is definitely planning something, but we don't know yet. Does he know that Raskolnikov has feelings for Sonia? I don't know. He might be able to put two and two together because he does know that, based on their conversation on the night that he broke up with Dunya, that Raskolnikov gave them the money that he got from his mom after Marmeladov died. And he may conclude that that wasn't because Raskolnikov is a quote-unquote wonderful guy, but because he has another reason for doing so. He has an ulterior motive. Does he consider that to mean that Raskolnikov has feelings for Sonia? I don't think we know that yet. I wasn't even entirely sure how Peter Petrovich knew about that donation that Raskolnikov made to their family after Marmeladov died. Maybe he was there or something and saw it. I really don't know. Seems kind of strange in a way because Raskolnikov and Peter Petrovich are like oil and water. Like, they just don't mix. Like, from the get-go, Raskolnikov is like, I do not want that dude marrying my sister. Like right out the gate. He was like that. And then, like, Peter Petrovich comes to introduce himself, and he's like, get out. I don't want you here, get. And, Peter Petrovich is like, I would like to have a meeting with you. If Raskolnikov shows up to our meeting, consider it off. We're not getting married anymore. And they brought him anyway. They brought him anyway, and he ended up falling through and getting breaking up with Dunya. And Razumhin's like, ching, I've got a chance. Doo, doo, doo. And there's another guy that's also trying to get with Avdotya. I can't remember his name. He was another one that Raskolnikov was not a fan of. Well, I'm pretty sure we'll see from him again. And much like none of Dunya's suitors get along. Like, they all hate Peter Petrovich. And I think that Peter Petrovich doesn't like Razumhin either. So yeah, thank you for watching the Russian Author series. I know I was dozing off there, but that's because War and Peace is slow sometimes and not too interesting. Hopefully that changes with the start of the Battle of Three Emperors. Okie dokie. Let's see, what time is it? 12:30? Yeah, 12:30. Okay. I think I'll dive into Hearthstone, Phoenix,
and then Fallout 76 Premiere. So thank you for watching, and I'll be right back.